Not about, the ethic is actually above everything else human happiness. And if you kind of deliver, and human happiness is not a single definition, you all have different definitions, and if you can deliver that, the humans kind of calm down, and then they start liking each other, and they stop trampling nature. So fundamentally, it's very human-oriented. And you know, humans have a pretty bad reputation these days. You know, they're the people that ruin the climate. And we're not into that. Like, we're into saying, you know, the humans are our team. You know, that's my team. What is it that how they would like to live? And so you'll see that ethos, in which is that, you know, we are committed to climate change. We are committed to the preservation of nature, but really by actually making humanity actually happier in the way they live. I do think Americans in particular are crazed. And, okay, first slide. Developers, this is a developer, and developers have a very bad reputation, and we can go on as to why that is, but I'll tell you, NIMBYism didn't exist when I started practicing. There's an emergent suspicion of actually any kind of urban growth, and people actually come out, people who don't bother to vote, come out evening after evening after evening to fight projects. There's an incredible commitment to fight things. This is a rational response to what's been happening. The promise of suburbia has been completely betrayed. You know, what they promised is that you would live in nature and that your cars would flow. You know, you'd be enough parking and enough highway capacity. Guess what? You didn't get either. Nature was trampled, and it's nothing but traffic congestion. And this betrayal has actually created a situation in which growth has a bad name. It's the only industry where growth has a bad name. People love everything else, they want to grow. You know, we love big numbers, big successes, but not growth. We fight development. And yet developers are the people who build all the places we love, right? Almost everything you see in the United States that you love was built by a developer. You know, huge percentage, 90%, 95%. The government has done very little, you know, particularly that you love. We love things that for-profit developers do. So the for-profit motive isn't the problem, it's the pattern. It's what they build. For example, I live in a place that's beloved called Coral Gables. And this is the developer. There's statues to the guy because he built towns. Developers used to build towns and part of towns, and we've always been grateful. When they started actually developing sprawl, which is not fundamentally sustainable, it can't even sustain, it chokes on itself, then developers got a bad name. So one of the reasons, one of the things that's interesting, you're going to meet a meeting here in the CNU, very idealistic people, all sorts of greens and all sorts of artists and all sorts of people, and developers, you know? And they're very comfortable here because we know that they're the ones that build things. By the way, we're pretty good actually engaging with government, particularly now that we're grown-ups. You know, government answers our phone. Didn't used to when we were kids. But we deal with government, but we also deal with the private sector. And the developers should actually feel comfortable. The other thing that's happening, of course, is that all the cities, even the ones that we're looking forward to the future, this is Charlotte, the great success story in the South, is actually also having a hard time with growth. So the new urbanism is propelled by different forces, and I want to get this over. I'm not going to finish the talk today because it's long, but I would like to actually make this point. The new urbanism is 25 years old and it's been propelled by four sort of powers. At the beginning with Robert Davis and the early new urbanists, we just wanted to make places that we loved, that's all. We wanted to make places that we could walk to things and so forth, and we were able to do it, and actually a lot of people agreed with it. So at first it was marketing. People paid a lot to live in a new urbanist community, which is one of the ways you measure success in America, especially if there aren't enough of them. So at first it was personal. I'd love to have a corner store, I'd love to live in this kind of house, I'd love to live near my kid, I'd like to have my kid walk to school. So it was a personal autobiographical thing, and a lot of Americans agreed with that. The second thing that drove it was NIMBYism. You know, within 10 years, developers couldn't get permits, and yet we could. Because we could argue, we understand perfectly why you don't want more growth, but we're not part of the problem, we're part of the solution. And that drove a lot of work for new urbanists, that in fact, for developers who didn't even believe in the new urbanism, but they couldn't get permits. And by the way, the government generally, the regulators loved it. You know, smart growth is the government branch of new urbanism. It's actually the new urbanism was essentially born out of private sector, and smart growth is identical, really, but it's born out of government policy. And so that coincided. The third thing that drove it, it's still very much alive, is health. You know, and health originally was, oh, you don't walk, you get fat, and so forth. But there's also a lot of social isolation now. You know, and as people get older, they can't drive. And there are a lot of poor people in America. By the way, 50% of Americans don't have cars. They just don't. They're too young, they're too old, or they don't have enough money to have a car. And so it's profoundly unjust. People talk about social justice. Talk about building places that are so profoundly unjust you can't even get to your daily needs. You know, that you have to be driven to your jobs or driven to your doctor. You know, so social justice is very clear to us. You have to have access. Now once you get there, you need a ramp, I get it. You know, we need to have handicapped access, but what about just getting there in the first place? So there's a profound injustice in creating places where you need an automobile just to get to your daily needs. Like, think about it. You don't have a car, you die. You don't have a car, you're incredibly disadvantaged. You don't have a car, you're incredibly inconvenienced. You know, you don't have a car, you're a child that has to wait for the parent to get anywhere. It's incredible. So health, the health thing is now broadly interpreted. It has to do with young people and old people who can't drive, not just health. And then the fourth is actually the green movement. Kate Benfield, one of the leaders, is going to speak after me. And you know, the green movement began in America with the protection of nature. You know, it came from the parks movement. You know, Roosevelt, you know, we protect nature. The ideal is wilderness. And so when you have wilderness, the first person undermines the ideal. And the American environmentalists are actually very much opposed to human activity. Europe has a much, much better record of actually absorbing environmental laws. And one of the reasons is environmental regulations. I mean, they're happy to do things environmentally that are environmentally sound. Why is that? Because when the environmental movement emerged in Europe in the late 19th century, there was no wilderness left. They had to always integrate humans into their conception of nature. It was not adversarial in Europe. You couldn't say, oh, here's a hill, let us ban all housing from the hill. The way actually it happens in the West. They say, well, you can't build there. Humans always destroy nature. You couldn't do that in Europe because there were perfectly nice Italian villages on every hillside. You know, the Germans lived in forests. You know, there were wonderful, wonderful cities that actually moved right up to rivers and banked the rivers. You know, Paris, London, the villages, the little streams that go through Swiss villages actually are channeled when they go through the village beautifully. So they couldn't say, the way American environmentalists do, stay the hell away from the rivers, stay the hell away from the mountains. In the United States, it's adversarial. And it has to do with the birth pangs of American environmentalism, which was wilderness. Wilderness is an ideal. A human is a problem. And so we have an incredibly contentious relationship in this country with environmentalism, which actually the new urbanism resolves. And if you go to the sessions that actually are about the transect, that's an environmental analytical system applied equally to nature and to the city. It's taking habitat and actually assigning it everywhere. And that's some of the latest technology we've done. So the fourth thing about environmentalism is that tailpipe emissions are terrible for climate change. It isn't just, you know, putting triple glazing in building like so many people believe. You know, one of the worst things is driving around for your daily needs. You know, it's so obvious. And yet, most environmental criteria doesn't do that. Well, the LEED has a new criteria written by new urbanists and very much by Cade, which is actually called LEED ND, LEED and Neighborhood Development. You know, which actually takes into account where you live and how you live, not just what your building does. Okay, so that's a summary of what has driven the new urbanism over the years. Now, the first thing that we do, the reason we came together is that we understood clearly what the opposition was with the enemy. And the enemy was so powerful that it actually put a lot of people together that weren't like each other, and actually we backed into each other to protect ourselves. So we have to understand, first of all, what the enemy is. And it is the enemy, and it's suburban sprawl. Now, suburban sprawl is not just about density. If you look at Chicago city, any city, Chicago, Detroit, the way it used to be, it's mostly houses. We're not against houses, okay? It's just that the houses have to be attached to a system where you can actually walk to your neighborhood store for your daily needs. You know, of course we prefer density. You know, that's the better performing. Density is better performing, but houses are fine. That's the way the Americans live. So we're not a group that just is obsessed by density either. But let's talk about what the enemy is. The enemy is, which is a post-war creation, is that the housing subdivisions, you can only live there. You can only live. It's not just a matter of aesthetic and boredom. You can only live. You can only dwell. You have shopping centers where you can only shop. You can't live there, right? And then you have office parks where you can only work. And then you have institutions like this high school. Can you believe that parking lot? You have that's a high school in Florida. Imagine teenagers having to have cars. Okay, so then you have high school. So what happens is, after the war, in the attempt to actually accommodate the car, they made walking impossible. Nobody ever told the developers, the planners, the engineers, the people with the regulations, to make walking impossible, to dismantle transit. Inadvertently, by giving priority to the car, they made walking impossible. And so once you actually have cars are wonderful, they erase distance. What happens is that the shop that is nearby, the school that is nearby, is no longer privileged. You can walk past the school, which is nearby, to the school you prefer. You can walk past the corner store to the market you prefer. I mean, you can drive. You can actually drive past, you know, your neighborhood bar to the really cool bar, you know, 10 miles away, because 10 miles is nothing to a car. So the automobile erased the privilege of proximity. It wiped out the corner stores, it wiped out the corner bars, and people now think nothing of driving 30 miles to Walmart, you know, because they save some money. And so the car wiped out, and then what happened was that the development industry responded, and actually they realized that things could actually be separated very easily. And the engineers love being able to measure traffic. Oh my God, you know, if we have all the cul-de-sacs lead to collectors, and all the collectors to arterials, we can clip the system. Which, by the way, a grid, you can't calculate the car in a grid, because you can go like a cockroach all over. You can say, oh, there's a traffic here, I'll go here, I'll go here, I'll go there. Like, you know, you make constant decisions when you have an open network. But boy, this system of the suburbs of dendritic, you know, every cul-de-sac leads to an collector. It just creates a whole profession of counting traffic. And so there are a lot of professions that are actually vested in the existing system. And the new urbanism first opposed them. We attacked them, so they noticed us. And now one after another, the professions are writing the new manuals. And one of the great successes is all the new traffic engineering stuff that's being written now. It's fantastic. One after the other, it's become the paradigm. So that's suburbia. By the way, you can't say, people will say, you can't live in villages anymore or in towns. That was then, this is now. Europe, particularly Germany, is full of villages. And by the way, they have no trouble building Mercedes-Benz, okay? We're not talking about going back to hand weaving, you know, because you live in a village. Okay? With telecommunications, it's wonderful to live in a village. Because actually you can get a lot of entertainment now downloaded. You don't have to be in the city. You can actually you can do your local shopping, but you can do first-rate shopping, high-end shopping in the internet. You can have dates wherever you want in the world. You know, everything comes in. Basically, the internet has erased the disadvantage of village living and retained the ability to get out to nature. So here you have Germany, right? Village-like, and in the United States, it's this fantastic, fantastic sprawl. The maps look very different. The new urbanist maps are like confetti, a lot of mixed use. The suburban maps are like this. And by the way, the suburban permitting maps, you only draw the collector, right? There's a lot of grid streets in here. The reason they're not drawn is that actually they're not operating. So one of the reasons you have congestion in the suburbs is that everybody's building a lot of asphalt. Okay, there are a lot of roads. A road leads to every house. But unlike the old system, where everything was connected and the road in front of your house was part of the solution to the traffic, because everything connected, all those cul-de-sacs, they don't do anything. They're just access. They don't solve the problem. They just dump everything into the arterial and the collector, which is why we have this ridiculous situation of very, very low density areas with incredibly high traffic. It's basically, you have the culture of a cow town and the traffic of a metropolis. That's what suburbs are about. You know, the worst possible situation, and it's the dendritic system. Now, what did it used to be like? Okay, now, because everything is split by zoning in suburban sprawl, some people live quite close to the shopping center. And actually, the shopping center, believe it or not, has the shops you need. Otherwise, it wouldn't survive. They do have drugstores and banks and so forth and markets. You know, statistically, if you look at a gross kind of GIS, you know, out there in the suburbs, there are the right number of shops and jobs and houses of different types. They're just never assembled. So all the ingredients of the omelet are there. You know, the peppers and the eggs and the salt, but they're never assembled. So what you do is you go directly to just eggs, to just peppers, to just salt, right? And so people here who live here, who naturally are in proximity to the town center, nevertheless can't get there. They have to go out, plug up the collector and the arterial, and then come back here, generating 4 parking spots for every car. Okay, that's how we're paving over America. It isn't just the cars. The cars are rather nice, actually, and compact and everything. It's all the asphalt they generate that we hate. Cars are really pretty cool. A lot of new urbanists like cars, and we're very excited about the new self-driving cars because they won't need parking. You know, we love the technology. It's just the parking lots. It's the asphalt. It's an environmental and aesthetic disaster. So how do we live in a city? This is just a village. It's in New England, but it's a very typical American village. What happens is that you have a main street, and on the main street, you live above the store. Why? Because it's inexpensive. Why? Because the cost of the land and the footings and the roof has been amortized by the store. So you live above it. Now, why do you like living above it? The young people love living above it because there's a nightlife. You know what a nightlife does? It extends your ability to date and mate. Okay, it just adds hours to the chance. Young people, that's their job. Okay, their job is to date and mate. Otherwise, humanity doesn't go forward, and actually nightlife provides that. And actually, as I said, the housing above is inexpensive. By the way, it's also noisy and so forth, and people can't put up with it unless they're kind of young and excited about it. And then what happens is you successfully mate and you breed, okay, which is normal. And then what you like is you move a little bit away and you have more space in what's called a starter house, and you might even have a yard. Not so much for the kid, but for the dog. Because actually the kid loves pavement. Don't romanticize kids anymore, they love wheels. Okay? So you basically have a yard for the dog, etc. But in the old days, you could actually still walk to the town center. The house was attached to the main street. And now in new urbanist towns, particularly the big ones that are complete, you have 5 and 6 and 7-year-olds that you give $10 to and say, see you at dinner. And they go in and they figure out lunch and they figure out their friends and they negotiate, they buy the French fries in one place and the Coke in another because they learn all about life. They love it. And in fact, the parents of other kids have dumped them in our towns to spend the day. Our towns are like great daycare centers, you know, for other people. And the kids love the freedom because they're actually attached, the house is attached. And then there's something about the American city, the American system we have to be reconciled with. Actually, we work so hard, much harder than the French and much harder than all the others, so we can own stuff. Okay, the French work less hard because they love leisure. I'm a great fan of that, by the way. You know, I'd rather work less and have more free time. We work more because we want more stuff. It's our reward system. You know, we have credit and all that. Well, if you sort of play it right and accumulate wealth and so forth, you get to live in a bigger house, which mostly allows you to store more stuff. There's more rooms and more garages and more yard, so you got to have those machines that you love, right? And so you live out here. So you have a natural transect from urban to rural that accommodates the different stages in life. Then as you get older and you're out there in your beautiful house, at some point you stop going out at night. Oh my God, I hate driving at night, and I hate driving in the snow, and Martha, I just hate going out. Okay, so what you do is you sell your house, which is accumulated wealth, and this time you go back downtown, but this time in a nice apartment. You know, not the above the store thing. And you know, all these old downtowns of ours used to have stories of office building, apartment buildings are 8 and 10 stories. You've seen them, really elegant, you know, quite large rooms. That's where the old folk would come back when they'd accumulated wealth and live downtown where they could walk around to their daily needs. So in this town, in the incredible intelligence of traditional urbanism is that it actually gives you choice. You can live here, there, or there. And that choice coincides profoundly with human nature and the human stages in life. It makes sense all the way up and down, right? And so in some ways, you don't have to completely understand every different society you're working with. There's some fundamental human nature things of human nature that you can recognize in Pompeii 2,000 years ago and in Beijing. A new urbanist can understand, can go to Pompeii and Beijing and completely read the city. Okay, but if you go to a suburban sprawl in France, you are so lost. And the French come here and they're so lost, they can't believe it. We do not understand, we can't read suburbia. If it weren't for GPS, what would we do? And so what we get is both of these places are in Virginia. Virginia, this is Alexandria, designed by Thomas Jefferson. This is Virginia Beach. By the way, believe it or not, this has been, since this old slide, this was given to me by the mayor of Virginia Beach. And this said, Virginia Beach celebrates its new town center. Okay. And of course, in those days, I was withering with the mayor, and I told him, are you kidding me? But here it is, okay. So this is the system. There's nothing but commercial here. So of course you have to drive there. You do need, therefore, this is an insanity. You do need that parking spaces. I mean, that isn't insanity. You need it because everybody has to drive there. You see all these lanes? You need them too. It's not insanity. It's internal to the system. Now, there are compensations. Like, for example, there's a tree save ordinance. There are organizations, and by the way, there's a signage ordinance, no ugly signs. And there's a sidewalk ordinance where only indigents use the sidewalks. Okay. There are organizations, typically not like the CNU, that are all about like tree preservation or signage. You know what I'm saying? When I speak of the complexity of the CNU, we deal with everything intimately. But there are organizations that think that, boy, if we just get the signage ordinance right, 30 pages of signage ordinance, we're going to be okay, we won't be ugly anymore. Or if we save trees, we're going to be fine. Of course you're not fine. It's everything that's necessary. Now, this, of course, is the public realm of America, in which the cars, in this case, are happy. They're making nice slow turns, easy parking. This is Alexandria that has much higher, and the street is actually very complex. It's got moving cars, it's got parked cars, it's got trees, sidewalks, and buildings up to it. And it's got a grid, so you can actually, every day, you can design your day. Oh, today I have to go to the bank, and today I have to go to the laundry, and my kid has to go here, I'll drop him off in school, and so forth. This dendritic system, the reason you need so many lanes, it's actually lesser density, is that all the traffic hits the arterial. And as soon as you have the traffic hit the arterial, you can't cross it. That's what I mean, inadvertently, in the attempt to accommodate the car. And it's a whole system. The whole thing is a system. These aren't idiots. This is an internally consistent system. It makes sense to a lot of people, but they're incompatible. Okay, if you start putting intersection crossings here, if you start parking cars on the street and so forth, it doesn't work. So one of the things that we do is we allocate. We say, well, you want a suburb? Fine, this is your code, go ahead and do it. But let us build new urbanism. Don't hamper us. Level the playing field. Don't make it harder to do new urbanist communities, because actually between 30 and 60% of the people want to live in new urbanist communities. They just can't because they're too hard to build. Our developer clients are heroes, saints and heroes, because it's so much harder to do it. So at some base level, we just want a level playing field. Listen to this. A level playing field to let the market operate. Okay, that's a presentation to the whole right wing to this country. They don't mind this, they love this. Level playing field, let the market operate. And by the way, when you have a left wing audience, you say, can you imagine the environmental impact on this? It's fabulous. Can you imagine the social justice impact? It's fabulous. So all I do is change what I wear. And then I present exactly the same projects differently. I have a closet full of polyester. Now, you may have noticed that actually we care about, and by the way, speaking from the air, when you get to the ground, these are two different places, right? This is absolutely by code. This is Sonoma, California. Sonoma is a destination for people who drive huge distances just to be there. By the way, the California landscape is beautiful everywhere. They look for Sonoma because of the towns. Everything about this town, the fire code, the way you park, the setbacks of the buildings, the mixed use, is actually illegal. But here's something I want to say. It's not expensive. New urbanism is not expensive. If you think it's expensive, you're doing it wrong. In Sonoma, the sidewalk is asphalt, and the trash can is an old oil can. Okay, new urbanism is not expensive. Urbanism, of the kind we like, was done when America was not rich. We built our great towns and villages, and we're not a wealthy country. In fact, suburbia requires you to be rich. It requires every American to own a car. The assumption is, oh, fine, I'll build your roads. I'm the government. I'll build your roads, but you have to buy a car. It's just the assumption, and that's very expensive. Owning an automobile in this country is over $10,000 a year. Okay, that's the AAA that comes up with that number. So what we're saying from the ground is we actually do empirical evidence and say, what is the rate of injury and death here, sir? Well, it's fine. When was the last time somebody tripped or was run over or died? And we're finding more and more and more is that this is where the people actually trip and get run over, etc. And it's not here. So there's a lot of theory that we've had to dismantle through empirical evidence. It's been very expensive. And a lot of people have volunteered a lot of good work to prove that this actually, which is right in front of you, works. Now, here's something that happens. When people say, oh, you guys are theoreticians, right? And I say, no, sir, you're a theoretician. You're just looking at the book. You're not looking at reality, right? Because we can walk right down. Almost every place in America has locations where what we want to do exists. And actually, the moving vans are moving, people aren't dying of fire. Like, what are you talking about? You know? And what's happened is that regulators and engineers and fire marshals have become the people of the books. They're the theologians. They don't look at what's in front of them, they're looking at the books. So we found that since you can't convince millions or hundreds of thousands of people, all you have to do is switch their books. They don't mind, they just want to administer something. Okay, they don't want to say, use your discretion. They don't want discretion. Discretion is incredibly scary. It could cost you the job. So we realized you actually change their manuals. They keep their jobs. They administer something that protects them. So we're very, very nerdy, actually, in terms of switching the manuals. And actually, you're not going to find fire marshals here. Probably not even one, although there have been. It's mostly about, but you will find people that know all about changing what they read and what they administer. So we're very, very concerned with the regulatory instruments, the codes. There's a lot of power in codes, because codes prevent us from doing things, and codes will therefore allow us to do things. Now, architecture. Something about architecture. Why are we concerned about architecture? Like, a lot of architects say, you guys are, oh my God. Now, I could spend the next half hour in architecture. But let me just say one thing that's going to horrify you even worse. Which I think architecture is camouflage. Okay, let alone do I not think it's art. It's just camouflage. What it does, it hides the fact, the scary fact that we're trying to get mixed use. Okay, let's give you an example. You see this store here? That store destroys real estate value as a small atomic power plant. Nobody wants to be next to 7-Eleven. Okay, you have to basically have walls and probably swales and then low-cost housing nearby before you get to the first decent house. Oh my God. Okay, here, and what that sells is exactly what this corner store sells, which is the stuff between the supermarket runs. And by the way, I chose a particularly hideous one, which is also orange and red. Orange and red. Okay, so it's not architecture. But because the setback is similar, because the size is similar, and because the syntax is similar, we have no problem. And I can go on and on about the power of architecture to reconcile different uses. If the office building looks like the apartment building, looks like the house, looks like the shop, people have no problem at all. All the wonderful old cities mix use madly, and they even mix size, big and little buildings with the same style. So that is the reason. Now, I would gladly code modernist architecture or arts and crafts architecture, whatever you want, but I've got to code architecture because I need the ability to harmonize the different uses. Now, if you say, well, what about artistic expression? We say, fine, the new urbanists protect the civic buildings. The civic buildings are never coded. Okay, that is where the architects and the institutions project their vision. That's where the art moves forward. You know, the churches, the concert halls, the museums, you know, any institution, we protect. That's where Frank Gehry comes in. But you can't come in and have somebody come in and make a black glass thing that says this is the new, because you'll freak everybody out. And we're always patching up situations, you know, that people are saying this is going very badly. I said, what's the problem? Oh, well, that building. I said, but that building isn't even large, but it's commercial. And then I looked down and said, well, that building's commercial too. And they said, well, we love that building. And what's the story? Well, they're both Mediterranean style. And so style, unfortunately, we have to use in a very utilitarian way for harmony. And as I said, we don't. The charter is very clear. We don't fight about this. It's very clear, which is that architecture has to be contextual. It's about fitting in. Now, by the way, if you're setting up a new context, if you're setting up a new town, fine, go to, do whatever you like, set up a whole new context. But harmony is a very important tool. I want to clear that up. Now, what about mixing income? One of the things about suburbia is that we have collectors, right? And then we have pods like this with single entrances. And in the suburbs, these have a very small range of income. Okay, for example, these houses here are $800,000, or within $100,000 of that. These houses here are $500,000. These apartments here are $120,000. Now, if you look at it from a GIS point of view, you've got mixed income, right? Oh, you got apartments, you have, starter housing, you have move-up housing, and so forth. And yet, they're segregated and they don't meet. Because when they come out to the public realm, the car allows you to not meet. And then you go, by the way, to different stores and different clubs and different schools. So what you get in an area like this one is you get a statistical, it's a full society statistically, but it's actually an archipelago. These people don't meet each other. You know, the people that go to the private schools and go to the high-end stores and live in the $800,000 houses don't meet the people that go to the other kinds of stores. And so when you don't know people, you begin to fear them. And you can't tell the difference between, let us say, dysfunctional affordable housing and somebody who's actually paying a mortgage for $120,000. In fact, this is associated with a headline that says, okay, subdivision panics. You can have a headline. I don't show it to you. And what's the subdivision panicking about? That somebody's going to build a $500,000 house, right, in $1 million place. So we have this society that's falling apart by income because we don't know each other. Now look at what urbanism does. This is Georgetown. Now, we are snobs, okay, and there's no cutting across it. This is typically what makes new urbanism kind of unpopular. We are snobs, okay? So what happens is that the people who live in this street in Georgetown really are uniformly wealthy. This is a very elegant street and it's all mansions. And then the people who live here all live in townhouses, and this street is full of apartments, okay? Very high income, medium income, and lower income, right? But they face each other. So these people say, oh, we're really, we can be snobs, we can be snobs, we can be snobs. But they share the same geography. So when you come out of here and walk the street, and and you meet somebody coming out of there, guess who it is? It's your school teacher. Hi, how are you? Nice to see you. Right? And when you meet somebody over here, guess who that is? That's your kid. Or your nanny, or your gardener, or the person you give the key to your house to. So what happens is that urbanism, by allowing people to remain snobs, you don't want to kind of cross that. Like we're not, Bernie can only go so far, okay? It's only half of the people. Some other people really want to say, I live in an elegant address, I worked awfully hard to do this. And they get that, but they all get to meet. And then it all calms down. And people say, we need each other. I need you to teach my kid. I like to live close to my kids and so forth. And so the presentation is actually extremely sophisticated, but problematic. Because people say, well, can't you break this up? Can't you break this? No, we actually can't break it up. Because that's actually beyond our pay grade. Okay, we're not going to change human nature. We always stop short of changing human nature. What we do is we enable human nature to actually operate in its most noble form. That's all we can do. Enable it. We don't force it. People who think we're nutcases, they still live there. Okay? What we don't do is mix them up. Okay? Because they actually undermine each other. They're incompatible systems. And then there's the whole business of confusion. The grid or not the grid, which is actually interesting thing to pursue. Okay, where to provide affordable housing? This country provided for 250 years, accommodating over 40 million immigrants without government help, housing. That actually generated, the whole continent was actually colonized by penniless immigrants. How did we do that? And by the way, within one generation, they were building theaters like this, and this is a first generation theater. This was built on raw land. This was nothing here. There were cows, and then this theater. So how did they do this? How did these guys do this? How did they generate enough wealth? And that is something that we're studying. And mostly, there's a new initiative called lean urbanism, which actually, and you should pursue this is very new to the CNU, is when you actually suspend regulations, when you actually ease regulations into a pink zone, people operate properly. Young people, small developers are able to create wealth and start businesses. Okay, so one of the things to track, there's the old new urbanism of the 20th century. And then there's the new urbanism that lasted until 1908, which we were very good at dealing with bankers. And then there's the new urbanism, the new urbanism that is confronting the 21st century, which is a century of limits. All the cities are statistically bankrupt by date certain. It isn't just Detroit. Go to any city and say, sir, can I speak to your controller? Talk to the mayor. Your controller, and you say, Mr. Controller, when is your city going bankrupt? What's the date? And they say, what are you talking about? No, you calculate it. You calculate when this is going bankrupt. You calculate when the pensions cross the income and what's going on with the old people, and every city is going bankrupt. Okay, bankrupt means this. Okay, but they are. So we can't have these stupid ideas that are extremely expensive, in which we separate, very simple, very easy to administer, you separate everything from everything else. This is where the affordable housing is. This is, and that requires government subsidy. We don't have government subsidy anymore. You have to do it the old way. You have to figure out how to do it. The 30 million that were housed, that housed themselves by building their own stuff, by building triple units so they could rent a unit to pay for their unit, to somebody so you could actually get somebody to run a corner store. Not to make a lot of money, but simply to get the food. The corner stores used to clear food. They would actually make enough so the family could eat, not much more than that. All this stuff has to be enabled again. And by the way, Detroit is pioneering that. The reason we're in Detroit is that this city, it's a very interesting thing. What's happening here, you've heard about Detroit, they can't afford cops. Well, guess what? They can't afford regulators either. So the young people are just going to town. They're coming in from Brooklyn. This is the coolest city to be in because the young people can act. It's what Soho was like in 1970. It's what the left back of Paris was like in 1870. When actually people aren't telling you not to do things, And by the way, in self-interest, you're doing the things right. Why would you start a business and actually make people ill, with the food? Of course you don't want to do that. You're going to take care of that. But you're not going to buy a $70,000 grease trap when all you're making is crepes. Okay, that's just please. you know, and you're renovating the building to 1970 standards, not to the new 2005 code, you know. We're all living in 1970 code electricity. How many of you were burnt this morning or know somebody who was? Well, guess what? The new electrical code, you can't even rewire. It doesn't fit in the old pipes. So nobody can renovate this stuff. But in Detroit, they're not harassing people. If the regulator shows up, they say, kids, don't hurt yourself, okay? I mean, it's fascinating. Fascinating what's happening here. This is really, we're here to learn. Okay, the new urbanists are here in Detroit to learn. It's a very interesting place. And it's, you know what it feels like? It feels like when I was 30. In 1970, 30-year-olds could get things done. Now you have to have a corporation just to hire the lawyers to get the permits or to do the great, you know, to do the EPA studies. And so you have to be aware, okay, that the new urbanism that you heard about, the old seaside new urbanism and the old TOD new urbanism, that actually is a continuously evolving place. And there are lots of there's lots of, for example, this is an old lecture. This lecture's been around for 25 years. But there are new codes, new initiatives. You may have heard of the New Urban Initiative for the United Nations. That's being discussed here. I mean, one of the principal writers is Michael Mahaffey and Duany. You know, like the UN, they're all arriving at the same conclusion. We have to have this combination of traditional urbanism with whatever works about the modern world. You know, it's a combination of things. It's not about nostalgia, it's about pragmatism. What works in the long run? We're not ideological modernists. We're not ideological traditionalists. Okay, we're just pragmatists, like show me, does it work? You know, does it work? Yeah, I actually think this stage shouldn't be so high. I understand. But on the other hand, like, look, I got a busted leg and I got up here. You know, we don't have to retrofit this. We don't have to spend $100,000 to retrofit this cinema either, which would make it impossible. You know, it's always impossible when you apply 2007 codes to 1927 buildings. It makes everything impossible. By the way, nothing about this meets fire code. I mean, give me a break. Where are the sprinklers? Where's the signage everywhere? You know, what's going on? Oh my God, there's a curtain here. Oh my God, it's probably not fireproof. You know. So Detroit is the future because it's like what America used to be in human memory, in living memory. It used to be this way. And that's the new urbanism. But here's one way that we've succeeded at. We know that affordable housing is very, very successful if it looks like middle-class housing. And you know, people don't take enough account. They actually say new urbanists don't do affordable housing. I'm sorry, but we wrote the Hope 6 standards. 270,000 units were built by HUD under Secretary Cisneros, who signed the charter. You know, he was there for the signing of the charter. We wrote the standards. 270,000 units of affordable housing were built. That actually, because it looks like middle-class housing, people aren't trashing. You know, we have a huge amount of housing now that is actually performing socially very, very well. Hope 6. And the thing is, you make it look, these are only 12-foot wide townhouses, and these are quite expensive houses on either side, but nobody minds it because you integrate. You also don't overwhelm an area with nothing but poor people. You know, you keep it at 10%, you keep it at 20%, that's fine, perfectly absorbable. But just don't say, you know, when you do an avant-garde affordable housing thing, it's like the hand of God saying, you're poor and you don't have a choice, so you have to live here. The architects take advantage of the poor because they can't move out. The other thing is the outbuilding. What's an outbuilding? An outbuilding is a room that has emerged and become a separate unit. America has hundreds of millions of empty bedrooms. Hundreds of millions that actually you can't use because it violates the privacy of the family. But if you were to separate them and allow outbuildings, not only is it a source of income for the family, but actually the kid can move back after college or you can rent it. And by the way, it's policed, its performance is policed by the principal owners. You know, so we've gone a long way to reintroduce it. By the way, many things that people talk about now, you know, like alleys and certain kinds of lots and building types that are now just in the air, it's what everybody talks about, we reintroduced. We had to, there were great aha moments saying, oh, wow, affordable housing. This is the way it used to be done. And then the other thing is, this is Kentland's, a very early project of ours. This house in those days, 20 years ago, sold for $400,000. This townhouse here sold for, let's say, 170, and this garage apartment rented for 400 a month. Now it's 10 times that, okay? But developers would come and say, and look at this, the prices are here, and say, wow, how did you do that? How did you mix income so radically? And we said, first of all, we don't talk about it. You know, we don't go to the sales office and say, you could be a snob if you live here. And we don't let anything less than you, right? We don't do that. And the second thing, it all shares the same architecture. So nobody notices. And actually, they like each other. You know, I've had dinner with all these people. The people that have literally 10 times as much money as the others. You can't tell them apart at dinner. They're just the same. They just have different kinds of jobs. And actually, much the cooler are the ones that have less money. So, you know, they're better company. Let's look at the office parks. This is downtown, a downtown that works perfectly. You work here, you come down, you have a 1 hour lunchtime. It takes 5 to 10 minutes to walk to 20 or 30 restaurants. You have your half hour, 45-minute lunch. You still have 15 minutes left. What a life at lunch, right? Lots of free time, lots of choice. This is today. This is Princeton, New Jersey, working right now. These are modern office buildings. This is a modern office park. What happens at lunch? Well, you either brown bag it, or you go out and spend all your time commuting to some kind of fast food restaurant. Totally different quality of life. Now, if you study standard of living, okay, which is what Americans study, this is a Class A office building because it's new and it's LEED, and it actually has probably, you know, whatever makes a building Class A. And this is a Class C because it was built God knows when. But that's when you take into account standard of living, okay? America wins categorically with standard of living. Our houses are bigger, they have more bathrooms, they're newer, we have more cars, we have more roads. We even have more money. Standard of living. Quality of life, way at the bottom. An Italian, see how they spend a day, okay? And they live in a little apartment, they don't have a car, etc. So one of the things we're gradually doing is coming up with metrics, because everybody needs metrics now, that actually measure happiness, indices of happiness or contentment. So we're measuring, the new urbanists measure not quality of life, not standard of living, which are hard metrics, your house is bigger, etc., but quality of life. And there's more and more and more of that kind of metrics being done, and it's a softer metric. It has to do with, do you think life is getting better? Are you more satisfied? And it's visible here. This is a much better metric, and nobody measures this than this. By the way, you see this person here walking? That's a theoretical possibility, but it's not actually ever happened. And then the other thing that's actually pretty cool is zoning emerged when actually the industries that actually made you ill, which are the great what they call the dark satanic mills that made you ill. The first generation of planners moved them away. The first zoning was get the mills over there, get the housing over here, and lo and behold, within 25 years, the index of health just went up. Like you read about places in which actually the average age at death was 22. And within a generation, it was 44. Like the doctors never achieved anything like that. And it was just actually moving away the poisonous stuff. And that's where zoning began. Segregation. By the way, every generation of zoner wants to relive that glory. And they segregate more and more things from everybody else. Like for example, when we redid the Code of Miami, there were almost 300 different zoning categories. You know, the restaurants were separated from the coffee shops. You know, the dentists actually were separated from the GPs with different parking ratios and everything. That's wrong. You know, this is a profession that actually is obsessed about that great victory. Now, what's happened is you may have noticed that we don't pollute anymore. It's illegal. And in fact, the workplace has to be healthy inside. So imagine outside. Of course it's healthy outside. It's healthy inside. If you want to do something that's unhealthy, unfortunately, you have to go to Mexico or Asia. That's where they do the unhealthy stuff. Okay? If we were still developing photographs, it'd have to be in Mexico, I'm sure. You know, because a chemical, you know. So, but what happens is, the good news is that we don't need to segregate industry anymore. So we can bring it back. Like for example, this is a delightful town, Leesburg, Virginia, and here's a big building. And in the back of that building is a huge printing press, right? And the printing press is right downtown. So the people who work here go to the pub in the corner, and they live on the same street. We can bring the workplace back. The only noxious use we have are trucks. It's the trucks that are a problem, not the old, the pounding machinery, the effusion of poison, the smoke, that's gone. So with alleys, very, very simply, putting the trucks in the back, we can actually bring even the workplace back into the city. And by the way, the planning departments haven't noticed this. They're still segregating things. But it's really all about handling the trucks, that's all. And then you can bring them all back. We can reassemble the town again. Everything's going our way. The internet compensates for small town living, and what used to be its disadvantage. The EPA has actually created an environment in which we can now fully integrate the workplace. Even the workplace that makes things can be integrated, and the planning profession hasn't caught on. But it is with us. The other thing, which is so important now, is called successional urbanism. The secret of the first Americans that colonized the country is that they were allowed to build buildings that were first-generation buildings, like this. Okay? By the way, if they survived, this is Telluride, they were great. So this is a very inexpensive building with just a little bit of architecture in front and a shed in the back. I mean, now it would be a butler building in the back. So you start a business and then you move on to there. You don't have to start with what we call the climax condition. One of the things has become a problem, and we were infected by it, is that we designed everything to be climax condition. So for example, when a new urbanist designed a town center, we designed 4-story buildings or 8-story buildings, and then it wouldn't happen because it wasn't until, by the way, everything was finished, and there was enough money to build a 4-story building. But if you look at our early work, like Seaside, all our early projects began with successional buildings. We incubated the buildings. We incubated the businesses with cheap space. And once they made it, they were happy to decant to that. So we need to go back to succession, successional urbanism. We start like this and we get there. That's how Detroit began. Detroit, you can see lithographs in which people were living in sod houses, right? And within 100 years, they were building stone skyscrapers. They couldn't have started with even brick buildings. This wouldn't have been colonized. And that's how it goes, and we come back to that. And we're developing the protocols. The other thing that's happened, and that's new, is that we basically invented the charrette. Believe it or not, everybody talks about charrettes in the public process and participation. That's something that we actually came up with. And now it's the air everyone breathes. But it's been distorted. And everything is now bottom up, bottom up, bottom up, bottom up. There's a kind of obsession with bottom up. And so it makes projects very, very difficult. It makes it very difficult for developers. You waste a lot of money with consultants. We can't do the big infrastructure anymore. Sometimes we do need to actually just blow through a place and put in a new power line. Because the solar farms over there, it's not where the old coal plant was, and we've got to bring that electricity to the city, and it's going to go through a lot of things. And we have to put bike paths in along people's backyards, and we have to put transit in front of your front yard, and it takes forever to do that. It takes absolutely forever because every citizen has a chance. That is a kind of contamination that we began. That's one of the things that you say. Now, this is a very unpopular thing to say, but some projects have to be top down. So we came across this system which is called subsidiarity. Subsidiarity, the theory is that actually the series of decisions are best made at a certain scale of decision making. For example, the scale of decision making is the household, the block face, the block, the neighborhood, the city, the region, the state, the country, and the United Nations. Right? And there are a lot of things that actually are decided by the United Nations and a lot of things that should be decided locally. I mean, you can argue that, for example, a city should decide whether it allows chickens or not, which is a very popular thing, is to have chickens at the level of the block. It shouldn't be done at the level of the city. And you can argue that the parking should be done at the level of the block face. And there's a bunch of things that the household can design. Like, for example, whatever happens in your backyard, the household decides that. Whatever you want. You know, barbecue in your underwear, great, fine. Okay, but the front, you don't barbecue in your underwear in front because it freaks out. It even freaks out the chickens. Okay, so basically, we have a very fine distinction about actually what rules you write about the front and what rules. And if you want to just make a horrible addition, fine, back. Okay, you want to make a nice addition? Cool, front. We'll rescind the front setback. If it's nice, you build it in front, fine. We'll even shorten the front setback. So subsidiarity is an incredibly powerful tool in which the modern charrette, actually, we get together and we decide what needs to be decided. We make the list, what needs to be decided, and then we decide what level is best deciding it, right? Privileging the most local decision makers. What is the smallest and most local group that can competently make the decision? And then in the charrette, we decide what is to be decided by whom. Okay, done. That's easy to do. And then what we do is we convene the group. We convene the group that is relevant to that. And say, okay, now you decide. But you don't just randomly say, oh, we got to locate an elementary school. Let's invite everybody. Well, what you invite everybody is only the neighbors come in and they say no, because there's traffic. But it's the right place for a school, because that school should be in the neighborhood. But if all the neighbors come in, only the neighbors, and they say no, then the school goes to the suburb, you see? And then the whole thing is stupid. You say, oh, charrettes are stupid. They just arrived. They're incredibly, they're a crapshoot. They're too expensive to get the right answer. So we realized something was happening, and then we began to address this. And that's typical New Urbanist, actually. We make propositions, and then we actually attack our own propositions. And it freaks a lot of people out, because people really do think that everything should be bottom up, you know? And they leave. And you said, fine, if you can't handle, if you can't confront the fact that this actually didn't work, that we didn't have time to actually consult everybody that had a no and convince them, then you know what? You know, fine, go join somebody else who believes that. But right now, the thing about the 21st century is that the numbers are enormous. Okay? Do you know how many people were born by noon today? 170,000. Okay, you know how many houses have to be built every hour? Housing? Every hour? 4,000 in the world. Okay, so anything that takes too long, anything that isn't efficient, is simply not relevant to the 21st century. The one characteristic of the 21st century that's uniform is not like, you know, a lot of architects think it's abstraction or, you know, self-expression. The only thing that matters in the 21st century is the large numbers we're confronting. And if you can't get it done efficiently, for example, I've had people who say, you know, Andrés, you're wrong. I was able to build 90 units of housing, you know, by consulting everybody. And I said, in the Bronx. And I said, how long did it take you to do that? 18 years. Jeez. You know, and I go to a UN conference and somebody says, you know, we built this perfect square in Ireland, in Dublin. It just works perfectly. Oh, this square is loved. We don't make mistakes. How long did it take you? 7 years. The numbers make your jaw drop. 4,000 housing units an hour. Okay? And so one of the things that actually is hard to take is how, as we enter the 21st century, how ruthless we've become about efficiency. But that's the ethos. You know, it isn't just let's lay back and start discussing everything from the beginning. We know a lot. Oh, it's done. Okay, we know a lot already. Okay, but that doesn't mean we're right. So the conference, this Congress, is about transmitting what we know, actually, which is a lot. There's a lot of smart people, 25 years, but then actually fighting back and say, yeah, but you know, it's not good enough, and that's how we move forward. Thanks.